Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about an incredibly cool system called Panchapakshi.
Panchapakshi.
Panchapakshi. Yeah, have you heard of this one?
I have. It's a system that comes out of ancient South India, so Tamil astrology.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's really cool.
Wow. And so what is Panchapakshi all about?
Well, the word Panchapakshi literally translates to five birds.
Okay, five birds.
And the idea is that everyone, based on their birth star, is associated with a particular bird. And that bird has a particular element that is associated with it.
Okay, so you've got your element from your bird.
Right.
Got it. And what can you what kind of information can you glean from this, from knowing your bird?
Well, every day, those birds are going through a cycle of five activities.
Mm,
So think of it as like a biorhythm
okay.
that's changing throughout the day. And it gives us this really fascinating insight into when is the best time for certain activities.
So it's almost like instead of thinking about good days and bad days, you're thinking about like good hours and bad hours.
Yes,
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. So tell me about these five birds.
sure. So the five birds are the vulture, the owl, the crow, the cock, and the peacock.
Mm.
And they are associated with the elements of fire, air, earth, water, and ether.
Wow, so all the elements are represented by the birds.
Exactly. And so depending on, what your birth star is, you would have a particular bird and you would have a particular element associated with you.
So is this similar to like Western astrology where you look at your birth chart and you see where all the planets were and stuff like that, or is this totally different?
Well, there are definitely some similarities, but there are also some big differences. Uh, Panchapakshi comes from the Vedic astrological tradition, which uses the sidereal zodiac,
Okay.
which is based on the fixed position of the constellations. And this differs from the tropical zodiac that is used in Western astrology.
So my sign could potentially be different in Vedic astrology than it is in Western astrology.
That's right.
Interesting. Okay, so we got the birds, we've got the elements, but then you also mentioned that there are five activities that they go through. Can you tell me about those?
Sure. So the five activities are dying, sleeping, walking,
Mm-hmm.
eating, and ruling.
Dying.
Yeah.
That sounds a little intense for a daily activity.
Well, we don't want to take that too literally, right? It's more
Yeah.
like a period of low energy withdrawal, maybe introspection.
Right.
So it's not literal death, but it is just, a time to kind of lay low.
Okay, got it. So we've got dying, sleeping, walking, eating, and ruling. Now, ruling sounds like the best one.
Yes, ruling is the most powerful activity.
Right.
Um, it's a time when our energy is really amplified. We have a lot of charisma,
Mm.
and we are able to kind of manifest our desires more easily.
Wow. So if I could plan all my important meetings and job interviews and stuff for ruling hours, that would be ideal.
Exactly.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm already starting to see how this could be really useful in my everyday life. So how do I figure out what my bird is? I'm assuming it's based on my birth star, but like, what if I don't know my birth star?
Right. Well, if you don't know your birth star, there are actually other methods that are mentioned in some of the Tamil texts that we are looking at, and that is they actually use the first sound of your name.
Mm.
So, for example, if your name begins with a short A or long A sound, you would be a vulture during the bright half of the lunar cycle and a peacock during the dark half.
Hold on. I'm going to need you to explain the bright half and the dark half to me because that's a new one.
So bright half and dark half refer to the lunar cycle.
Oh, okay.
So it's like the moon's breath.
Hmm.
So the bright half, also known as Shukla Paksha in Sanskrit, it is like the inhale,
Mm.
right? So from new moon to full moon, we are building energy.
Got it.
And then the dark half, Krishna Paksha, is the exhale. So that is from full moon back down to new moon, and that's where we are releasing energy.
Okay, so depending on what phase the moon was in when you were born, that could also influence your bird.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so much to think about here. But then you also mentioned there's like this whole other element of yamas, is that right?
Yeah, so yamas are these time intervals throughout the day.
Okay.
And imagine that each day is divided into 5 yamas, and each yama is roughly about 2 hours and 24 minutes long.
Okay.
And each of those yamas is associated with one of the 5 bird activities.
So throughout the day, my bird is cycling through all of these different activities.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, and how do I know what activity my bird is in at any given time?
Well, that's where some of the Panchapakshi charts and the calculations come in. We can look at the specific lunar day
Yeah.
and the time of day to determine, exactly what activity your bird is in.
Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Okay,
Yeah.
so much to unpack here. So we've got the birds, we've got the elements, we've got the activities, we've got the yamas, and then is there another layer to this as well?
There is another layer, and this is where I think it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Because, we've been talking about our own personal bird and our own activities, but
Mhm.
This system also acknowledges that we are constantly interacting with other people.
Right.
And so it takes into account the interactions between different birds.
So, like, are there some birds that are like enemies and some that are friends?
Exactly. So each bird has friendly birds and enemy birds. And if your bird is in a very powerful activity, say ruling,
Okay.
and you are interacting with someone whose bird is in a weaker activity, such as dying, the dynamic is going to be more in your favor.
Oh, so this is like giving me a secret weapon in all my interactions.
We don't want to think of it as a weapon, but it does give us some really interesting insights into the dynamics that might be at play.
Right. It's about being aware of the energy.
Exactly.
Okay, so I am really fascinated by all of this, but how does it actually work in practice? Like, can you give me some specific examples of how I can use Panchapakshi in my everyday life?
Absolutely. So let's say you are planning a trip.
Okay.
Panchapakshi can actually help us to determine really auspicious times to travel.
You're telling me I should be checking my bird's activity before I book a flight.
It's a really interesting thing to consider.
Wow.
And then also, if you are starting a new business or you are building a house, even Panchapakshi has some really specific advice
Yeah.
about the best times to begin those ventures.
That is so fascinating. And I think I read something in the outline as well about nectar points. This is starting to sound a little bit more spicy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nectar points definitely fall into the category of Panchapakshi and sexology, which is another area that this system addresses.
Okay, well, I am definitely intrigued to learn more of that. We will have to save that for later in the episode, but this is just scratching the surface. I am so fascinated by this system of Panchapakshi already.
Yes, there's a lot more to explore.
So much more to explore. All right, so we've talked about the 5 birds and the activities and the yamas and all that good stuff, but now I want to get into, like, how can we actually use this in real life?
Yeah.
Let's start with travel, because who doesn't love to travel?
Right.
So you're telling me that, like, before I book a flight, I should be consulting my Panchapakshi chart to see what my bird is doing.
Well, it's definitely something interesting to consider.
Okay.
You know, according to this system, if you begin a journey when your bird is in the ruling activity,
Yeah.
it's said to be like really auspicious, like a really good time to travel. You'll have smooth sailing, and things will go well.
Okay, but what if my bird is dying? Should I just, like, cancel my trip?
Well, it's interesting that the texts do say that beginning a journey when your bird is dying is like a big no-no.
Oh.
It's considered very inauspicious.
Mhm.
But, I don't know that it's always possible to just cancel a trip.
Right.
But it is something to be aware of. And if your bird is dying when you are traveling, maybe just be extra cautious.
Right, like double check that you have travel insurance.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so ruling is good, dying is bad. What about, like, the other activities? Like, if my bird is walking or eating when I travel, what does that mean?
Right. So walking suggests that, there might be some obstacles or delays on your trip.
Mm,
It could be a little bit more of a winding path.
got it.
Whereas if your bird is eating when you travel, it could be a really enjoyable journey. A lot of, like, pleasure and good food.
Interesting. This is making me want to, like, go back and look at all my past trips and be like, hey, what was my bird doing during that time?
Right.
Oh, man, that one time that was so chaotic. I wonder if my bird was dying.
Could be.
Okay, so travel is one thing, but this system also has some interesting insights when it comes to starting new ventures, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So whether we are talking about building a house or starting a business or even, like, starting a new relationship, Panchapakshi has something to say about that.
Yeah, it's really big on choosing the right time.
Okay, so not just avoiding those dying days, but actually looking for those times when my bird is, like, really thriving.
Yeah, and they get really specific.
Oh, yeah. How specific are we talking?
So, for example, they say that if you begin construction on a house when your bird is in the second abstract activity of eating.
Okay, hold on, back up. What's the second abstract activity of eating?
So, we have our main 5 activities, right?
Right?
But then within each of those activities, there are actually 5 sub-activities.
Wow. Okay, so it gets even more granular.
It's like layers.
Okay, so what does the second abstract activity of eating mean?
Well, each of those sub-activities has a slightly different flavor, but they're all kind of under the umbrella of that main activity.
Got it. Okay, so the second abstract activity of eating, if you start building a house, then it will flourish for 200 years.
That's what they say.
Wow, okay, 200 years. That is some long-term planning.
Right.
Okay, so this is making me think, like, when I'm consulting my Panchapakshi chart, I need to look not just at the main activity, but also at that sub-activity.
Yeah, it adds another layer of nuance.
Totally. Okay, so travel, new ventures, what else can we use this for?
Well, the outline mentions something about sickness and how Panchapakshi can be applied to that. So maybe we could talk about that.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right.
So is it like claiming to predict when I'm going to get sick?
No, not really predicting. But what it does say is that, if you happen to fall ill,
Hmm.
the activity that your bird is in at the onset of that illness can kind of tell you something about the severity and duration.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, for example, if you were to fall ill when your bird was in a really strong activity like ruling or eating,
Mm-hmm.
it suggests that you might recover more quickly, and it might not be as severe.
Okay, so like my body just has more energy to fight it off or something.
Yeah, you could think about it that way.
Got it.
But if you were to fall ill when your bird was in a weaker activity like dying or sleeping,
Uh-uh.
then it could suggest that, it might be a more prolonged illness or it might be a little bit more challenging.
So it's not really about like preventing illness. It's more about understanding how your body's going to respond to it.
Yeah, and one thing I really appreciate about this system is that it doesn't just leave you to fate.
Right.
There are actually a lot of remedial measures
Yeah.
that are prescribed for different situations.
Oh, that's cool. So like if my bird is in a not so great activity when I get sick, there are things I can do to kind of mitigate that.
Yeah, they do recommend certain things like performing abhisheka,
Pishika.
yeah, which is a ritual bathing of deities.
Wow.
And that's thought to kind of invoke divine support and kind of shift the energy.
Oh, that's cool. So it's not just about knowing what's coming, but it's about like taking action.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, well, before we move on, I'm also curious about this thing in the outline about puberty.
Right.
It says that like the timing of a girl's first menstrual cycle in relation to her bird's activity can tell you something about her future that's kind of wild.
Yeah, so, this is where it starts to get really interesting, I think.
Huh?
Because, we are looking at the connection between these subtle energy rhythms and these major life events.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do say that, when a girl gets her first period, if we look at what activity her bird is in at that time, it can give us some indication about, her married life, whether she'll be happy and wealthy, even potentially how many children she'll have.
Wow, that's a lot of information in one event.
Yeah.
Okay, so really just fascinating stuff here, but I know we have even more to explore, right? Like horary astrology and nectar points and all of that.
Yeah, we got to get to the nectar points.
Okay, stay tuned, folks, because things are about to get juicy. All right, so we are back, and I'm really curious about this whole horary astrology thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like I have a question, and I can just ask the system, and it's going to give me an answer. Like, that's kind of amazing.
Right. It's like having a cosmic advisor.
Right, exactly. Like on call whenever I need some guidance.
Exactly. And it's not like fortune telling or anything like that. It's really just looking at the energy of the moment
Right.
and kind of using that to inform our decision making.
Okay, so let's say I have a question about like a job offer I just got. Should I take this new job?
Right. So you could ask that question, and then you would look at your Panchapakshi chart and see what activity your bird was in at that very moment.
Okay, so let's say my bird is eating. What would that tell me?
Well, eating is associated with growth and nourishment.
Mm-hmm.
So it could suggest that, this job would offer you opportunities for expansion, maybe even financial abundance,
Yeah.
could be a good sign.
Oh, okay, that's good. What if my bird is dying, though? Like, does that mean I should just, like, reject the offer?
Well, dying doesn't always have to be a negative thing in this context.
Okay.
It could just mean that you need to be really careful and really consider all the angles before making a decision.
Mm-hmm.
It could highlight some potential challenges or things that you need to be aware of.
So it's not just like a yes or no answer. It's more about like understanding the nuances.
Exactly.
Okay, so, jobs are one thing, but I imagine you could use this for all sorts of questions.
Oh, yeah. People traditionally use horary astrology for all kinds of things.
Like what?
Like finding a lost object, understanding relationship dynamics, really any kind of question you can think of.
Wow. Okay, so it really is like having a personal cosmic advisor. Okay, so we have to talk about the other thing, too, the nectar points.
Yeah.
Panchapakshi and sexology, this is where it gets juicy.
It does get juicy.
So tell me about these nectar points.
Okay, so this is an area, we want to be really sensitive and mature about this. But the system actually identifies specific points on the body that are believed to be particularly receptive to stimulation.
Okay.
And the idea is that, when these points are touched, it can create heightened pleasure.
And so how do you know where these nectar points are?
Well, the really interesting thing is that they actually change every day based on the lunar day.
So there's a different nectar point for every single day of the lunar cycle.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I need to be checking my Panchapakshi calendar before things get intimate.
Well, it's not quite that simple
Okay.
because it also takes into account the bird's activity.
Right, of course, because everything does.
Everything does.
So, like, my bird's activity could influence where the nectar point is on my partner's body, or vice versa.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, this is so complex.
It is complex.
But, like, in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah, okay, so we are talking about, like, really fine-tuning things here, like getting super specific.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing to remember with all of this is that it's about respect and consent.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, this is not about manipulating anyone or pressuring anyone.
Right.
It's about enhancing a connection that is already loving and respectful.
Well said. Yeah, it's about working with the energy, not against it.
Exactly.
Okay, now I also remember you mentioned something about poison points. I'm a little bit scared to ask, but what are those?
Yeah, so just as there are points on the body that are believed to be really receptive to stimulation,
Mm.
there are also points that are considered kind of detrimental.
Mm.
Stimulating these points could actually lead to discomfort or even harm.
Okay, so we want to avoid those.
Yeah, it's all about having this holistic understanding of the body's energy map.
Right, and you know what I appreciate about Panchapakshi is that it doesn't shy away from these topics.
Right.
Like, it's really embracing all aspects of life, even the ones that might be considered a little taboo.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, okay, well, this has been an absolutely incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've learned so much about Panchapakshi, and, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah, just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly, so much more to explore.
So much more.
But I am feeling really inspired to, like, maybe start tracking my bird's activities and see how that plays out in my own life.
Yeah, me too.
So what about you listening? Are you intrigued by this whole idea of, like, ancient biorhythms and aligning your actions with the cosmos? We would love to hear from you, and until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.